Hello and welcome to GameSack. Time to take a look at more games that push the limits of the consoles they run on, make them absolutely choke. Actually, this series is more about some cool things that games do via either programming trickery or simply some really good optimization. And this first game gets mentioned in many such discussions, but I've never had it in this series before because I suck at playing it. It's time to finally mention Burning Rangers on the Saturn in this series. It's no secret that I don't particularly enjoy playing it. In fact, I've only been past the first stage once since I bought it when it was released, as I usually just kinda get bored playing it. This time though, I cheated using some Pro Action replay codes. And you know what? This is honestly the most fun I've ever had with this game in the 20 plus years I've owned it. I could concentrate on finding my way through the mazes and rescuing people without having to worry about time, crystals, or life. These digital bits have never been read off of the CD or processed by my Saturn before this. It also means that I can show you more examples of the programming wizardry that happens here. Don't get me wrong though, the game is still wonky as hell and it features some of the worst swimming controls I've experienced in a 3D title. Anyway, you're an anime firefighter and you collect crystals and then use them to teleport people out of burning structures.
Calm down, it's okay.
Yeah, calm down. Stop being alive. Oh wait, I'm not sure that you are. Oh, silly loading times. The game only has 4 levels, and it probably needs a bunch more, even though these levels are each pretty damn big. A game doesn't have to be fantastic to do some impressive things on a technical level, though. And honestly, the graphics don't even have to be particularly good either, even if it's the graphics that are pushing the hardware. Allow me to explain. The title screen gives you a good idea of what you're in for, as it has lighting that's moving around. In fact, this game features a lot of dynamic lighting, which is quite impressive for the Saturn. It's often directional, so it'll be coming from the direction of a fire or whatever else is lighting things up. It even emits light in various colors, which, once again, is fairly rare on the Saturn. They use this feature to make many parts of the game extremely colorful. I mean, come on, this is a lot of color, and I will hear nothing to the contrary. In fact, this is probably the best lit Saturn game, at least in terms of this kind of lighting. Sometimes the power goes out in the game just to show off the lighting effect where it only comes from you. This makes the gameplay a bit tougher when this happens because you can't really see much obviously, but fortunately it doesn't happen too often, mainly in the first stage. Moreover, this game even has some transparencies. We all know the Saturn cannot do transparencies, so they had to resort to actual witchcraft. Mainly the fires that you encounter are transparent, and you'll encounter a lot since this is a game about being an anime firefighter after all. There are also some other transparencies, like in this water tank and whatnot. So overall, it's pretty cool that they were able to achieve all of these things. It's just too bad that the sum of these parts isn't very great. I mean, despite the impressive effects, the graphics are still quite glitchy with clipping, flicker, extreme warping, and pop-up everywhere. And look at this weird outline mat around the character when she stands in front of the transparent tank. What is up with that? Sometimes, things that should be rendered behind something appear in front of it, like with this shape here. And it should go without saying that the performance is pretty bad, running at a less than ideal frame rate with a camera that's, you guessed it, wonky. Honestly, I just think this game was ahead of its time on the Saturn. It's too ambitious for the hardware, but damn, they sure tried, didn't they? Yes, they certainly did, and I can respect that. If you want to see how a Dreamcast game would run on the Saturn, I think this game gives you a pretty good idea of just that.
Tillis, there's a large energy reading in your area. Watch yourself.
This is Reed. We're almost in the recreation area. Man, there's fire everywhere.
I can't believe I've never talked about Akumajo Dracula X Chino Rondo or Castlevania Rondo of Blood in this series before. This Konami title for the PC Engine Super CD never left Japan in its own time, but of course there are many different ways to play localized versions of this game today. Everyone already knows that this is one of the best Castlevania games ever made, but one of the things that makes it so impressive is just how far it pushes the limits of the system. I mean, this is pretty much what we expected from the TurboGrafx 16. It only has a single background layer, and overall the graphics seem simplistic compared to what we saw on the Genesis. But Konami says, screw you guys, we're pulling out all of the stops here. Nearly every stage has some form of parallax scrolling, and usually it's the overlapping kind. Sure, the non-overlapping kind is still good and appreciated, but it definitely takes less effort. 2 layers is cool and all, but how about 3 overlapping layers of scrolling? The mighty TurboGrafx-16 rules. The boss fights are always a sight to behold as well, with tons of animations and lots of thought put into their designs. That's more art design than anything technical though, but I still wanted to mention it so I could make this segment feel like it has more substance and the game therefore more impressive. But even many of the common stage enemies are super impressive. Look at these giant rock dudes. How do they sleep? What do they do for fun? Do they have to pay taxes? What's their deal? The effects that this game pulls off totally blew me away back when it came out. All of this usually performs without a hitch, maybe a bit of flicker here or a tiny amount of slowdown there, but this doesn't happen often. I couldn't believe my TurboGrafx CD-ROM was doing all of this when I first played this game back in 1993. It really lets you know how much of a beast this console actually is. So this next game, I've never even played until now. And you know what? I'm never gonna play it again. This is Exo Squad on the Genesis from Playmates and Novatrade based on a little-known cartoon. These are the companies behind Earthworm Jim and Echo the Dolphin respectively. What could go wrong? Well, actually just about everything. This game does attempt plenty of special effects. First are the stages with the Space Harrier style of gameplay. The screen slightly rotates around as you move. A couple of this guy's stages even have some parallax scrolling in the distance if you look closely. And that's right, both layers are rotating. The side view stages offer many layers of scrolling, though sometimes it scrolls into the foreground and obstructs the player. There's also one-on-one fighting stages that offer some cool looking multi-jointed sprite animation. Even the intro screens are cool, like this Sega logo here. The Playmates logo looks like it has scaling, but it's just clever sprite movement. And honestly, that's about it for the impressive stuff. Now for the depressive stuff. You play as 3 different characters and each has their own gameplay style. The 28-year-old guy who looks 47 has the Space Harrier stages. The younger dude has the walking side-scrolling stages. And the girl has the one-on-one fighting game stages. The variety would be welcome if any one of these aspects were done well, but none are. You are way too big in the Space Harrier stages. How are you supposed to avoid anything? It also makes these stages play so twitchy. Who would enjoy this? I can't think of a single person who would. The one-on-one fighting stages have probably the second worst fighting in a game ever, right ahead of Slaughter Sport, also known as Tongue of the Fat Man or Mondu's Fight Palace. The side-scrolling stages are the best, but that doesn't mean that they're good. You have to press left to crouch. Yeah, because that feels natural. In both of the ground-based stages, the control is so slow to respond and animate that it actually makes playing the game more of a chore. Between the stages, you get cutscenes that look like they're drawn with art alive. They didn't try very hard with these. The music is almost okay sometimes. Perhaps the most impressive thing about the gameplay is that someone okayed this, gave it the go, and actually released it like this. I don't recommend this one at all, and there's a reason nobody ever talks about it. But now you're aware of the special effects that it pulls off thanks to my suffering through it. And suffer I did. This is Toy Story Racer for the Game Boy Color from Activision and Tiertex. This was on the show not too terribly long ago, and good games from bad companies or whatever the hell I called that episode. And generally, this one can be an enjoyable racing game, and enjoyable is not a word usually associated with a Tiertex product. Basically, you choose your favorite character from the entire Toy Story universe. Well, the ones that they let you choose from anyway. You then race through the house or even the neighborhood. What you want to do in this game is win these races. So anyway, this game is pretty darned impressive on a technical level for the Game Boy Color. It's basically streaming FMV, or full motion video, of the racetracks which have all been pre-rendered with cutting-edge computer animation. Because of that, your racer sways left and right on the screen rather than you remaining centered and the environment moving around you like in most racing games. It works in a similar way to, say, Mega Race if you're familiar with that one. Mega Race is on the Sega CD though, where full motion video is expected by everyone. This is a Game Boy Color game, and need I remind you that it's a portable system that uses cartridges. Granted, it's a pretty big cartridge for the system memory-wise, clocking in at 16 megabits, the same size as Street Fighter II on the Super Nintendo. The video streams here at about 10 frames per second, and the racers and items are sprites laid on top of that video stream. The frame rate will slow down if you slow down for any reason, and that's really the only way the game can depict a slower speed. To me, it's amazing that they were able to fit several tracks, all of the game sprites, and the game program itself into, honestly, not very much memory. It's not like they had H.264 or HEVC codecs back then, nor does the Game Boy Color have anywhere near the horsepower to decode anything like that. Instead, it's done the old-fashioned way, by reducing the amount of screen it takes up and the amount of colors. You'll notice that the HUD takes up both the top and bottom of the screen, so that's some screen real estate that the video doesn't need to worry about covering. Also, usually there are only about 6 colors on the track video at any given time, though sometimes it can go as high as 8 colors. Next, the entire track isn't one long video. Instead, each track is made up of several different track parts stitched together to make it feel like one single long track. By doing it this way, they can make each track feel longer and more varied than it actually is. Kudos to Tiertex for impressing the hell out of me like this with the Game Boy Color. And like I said, this game can be kind of fun as well, so maybe give it a try. Also on the Game Boy Color is Cannon Fodder from Codemasters. This is a point-and-click overhead run-and-gun game. Yes, that's a thing. It's clearly designed to be played with a mouse, but surprisingly, it works okay using a D-pad. You move the cursor around to point your soldiers where you want them to go, and then press a button to make them start moving. You press the other button to fire in that direction. You have 2 soldiers which represent your hit points. You can keep going if one of them gets hit, but if both of them die, you get sent back. There are a lot of voices that play back during the game, and you don't hear voices a lot on the Game Boy Color. Not only that, but the music is sampled recordings as well. It doesn't sound, great or anything, but it's still pretty impressive that they did it. But what's really impressive about this one is the intro. It's another title that has full motion video on a Game Boy Color cartridge. It certainly helps that this game has 32 mega power, twice as much as Toy Story Racer, so there's probably more video than just this scene. Pretty cool, please be impressed.
Now I have you.
Okay, let's take a quick look at something that always blew me away back in the 8-bit days. That's right, voices in cartridge games. Really, it seemed so futuristic to me back then, but I was probably just dumb. Still kind of am, I guess. I've covered some super clean NES voice samples in this series before, like those in Skate or Die 2 from Electronic Arts.
Yo, dude.
But let's check out some more vocal examples from the console that would have made me super jealous back in the day as someone who was so proud of his Sega Master System.
Major bummer, dude.
Like this one, which is called The Adventures of Rad Gravity. It's from Activision and Interplay. In this one, you play as a Bruce Campbell-looking guy who needs to go to different cities on different planets throughout the solar system. You'll be collecting and using items as you progress through various levels. If you can defeat the final boss, who is a huge pain in the ass by the way, you'll discover that the developers had a lot of space left over for a super clean voice sample.
Farewell till we meet again.
That sounds incredibly clean. It turns out though that we'd never see Rad Gravity again. There's also Dirty Harry from Mindscape and Gray Matter. The game is absolute trash. The controls are so wonky, as is the animation, and honestly, the game design itself. You certainly don't see anything here that looks like it could be pushing any limits. Well, it'll definitely push the limits of your patience, that's for damn sure. The game is full of so much jank, it's not even funny. Well, maybe it is. But I think there's a reason for all of this jank. They used so much memory for the voice samples that there was barely any room left for anything else in this 3 meg game. You first get the famous line at the title screen.
Go ahead. Make my day.
That's awesome. Not as clear as the previous examples I showed you in the other games, but it still kicks ass. You can even put in a Game Genie code to hear a slightly cleaner version of it.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Unfortunately, the game won't start after it plays the line if you use this code. But that's not all. If you manage to actually beat the game, it has pretty much this entire scene.
I know what you're thinking, punk. You're thinking that you fire 6 shots or only 5. I'll tell you the truth, I forgot myself in all this excitement. But being this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and will blow your head clean off, you could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
That must take up a ton of memory. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find a Game Genie code to get this one to play back cleaner. Still, I want you to know that I went through hell so I could capture this voice sample for you. I think it was probably worth it. How about Phantasy Star on the Master System from Sega? This RPG came out at the end of 1988 in North America, and it was one of the very first RPGs released on a console over here. And boy oh boy, what an impression this made for people new to the genre, which is pretty much everyone who wasn't rocking a PC back then. And I'm sorry, even compared to those, it makes a kick-ass impression. The idea of a story-based quest game on a console was pretty unheard of at the time, as most games wanted to be arcade-like action. Sure, you had a few, like the original Zelda, but that one was honestly fairly minimal on story, especially outside of the game manual. Before Phantasy Star, we also had Miracle Warriors on the Master System, which is technically a true RPG, though it was clunky and once again the story aspects weren't hugely significant. Sure, Phantasy Star doesn't let you assemble your party from different classes any way you want like you can in Final Fantasy, but I feel Phantasy Star is better for it. You get actual predetermined characters with their own stories that you get to know as you go through the game. Well, as much as a 1988 game would let you anyway, and honestly, they did a tremendously good job in that aspect for the time. Gameplay-wise, this really feels like a 16-bit RPG. 8-bit RPGs were largely unappealing visually and even clunky to play. Not here, this game was very much ahead of its time. Whereas other 8-bit RPGs had their random battles on blank backgrounds or simply right in the middle of the overhead map, Phantasy Star's battles take place on gorgeous scenery which changes depending on where you are on the map when the fight triggers. These backgrounds were all incredible, and some of them even had some animation. Holy crap, look at that! Is it the year 2000? Speaking of animation, all of the enemies animate as they attack. Sure, you can only see one of them on screen when you could be fighting 4 or 5 of them, but they still look awesome. The world in this game is giant for an 8-bit title. All 3 of the game's worlds. They really packed a lot in this 4-meg cart, which also has a battery backup to save your game. And that's about all I can say about this one. Just kidding, let's not forget the dungeons. These are an absolute blast to see in action. Yuji Naka used his programming wizardry to great use here. Pun intended. I always felt that Yuji Naka was a better programmer than a game director. Sorry Naka-san, but it's true. Doing the dungeons this way with a smooth turning animation really helps you realize where you are. Many 16-bit games had dungeons like this without the smooth movement, and they were much more confusing as a result. It's almost insulting that anyone would make a dungeon like this after Phantasy Star exists. Sadly, we'd never really see anything like these dungeons again. Well, I take that back. Actually, Shining in the Darkness on the Genesis gave it a go. You still get a really good sense of where you are thanks to the animation, but they forgot to animate the floor and the ceiling as you turn, so it ends up looking kind of dumb. How did they forget that? Plus, it's in a tiny window, and Phantasy Star is full screen. Stupid Genesis. Oh, and Shin Megami Tensei kinda tried, I guess. Better than nothing. Lastly, I'd like to mention one more impressive feature about this game that other games rarely do. When you're strolling along the map listening to the music and a battle interrupts you, the music of course changes to the battle theme. Yeah, that's not very exciting, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. When the battle's over, the previous music picks up where it left off instead of starting over. This really helps the game to feel much less repetitive. It goes without saying that I recommend this one, so get it on the Switch before Sega delists it, if they haven't already. This next game probably didn't blow many people away with any kind of limit pushing as they played it, but that's likely because the game does its best to be unnoticeable in that regard. Now, if you disagree, comment below, call me out, and put me in my place, but I think it's pretty impressive how well this game runs. I feel it's time that Space Megaforce from Toho and Compile on the Super NES got a mention in this series. Yes, that Toho. This game is called Super Aleste elsewhere. The Aleste games are a series of vertical scrolling shooters that got their start on the Sega Master System, where it's known as Power Strike in the West. Another notable game in the series is Musha on the Genesis. So, Space Megaforce has some pretty good pedigree to begin with. Oh, I gotta ask, do you like blazing lasers on the TurboGrafx 16? Because Space Megaforce is basically that game. Well, it feels like a sequel to Blazing Lasers. Blazing Lasers, known in Japan as Gunhead, was also developed by Compile, but it was never officially part of the Aleste series. Probably because the name Gunhead was taken from a movie of the same name, which has absolutely nothing to do with the shooter here. Seems like maybe Compile wanted to correct for that weird choice, which was actually Hudson Soft's call. Many of the weapons here are from Blazing Lasers, especially the laser, which is one of my favorite weapons in both games just because it's so weird. But this one also has some similarities to the first Aleste game as well, like a couple of the weapons. Also, the way the ship flies off the screen after beating a stage is very similar to the first game. One thing that this game has that's new is that you can hold the R shoulder button as a modifier for each weapon. That's pretty cool. This game has 12 stages, and like Blazing Lasers, many of them are way too long for their own good. I think that they knew this, as there's a short game option on the title screen. Some of the stages are basically like a caravan shooter, and they're extremely short without a boss at the end. Instead of the purple orbs from Blazing Lasers, you collect yellow eggs here. These will help you gain points and also power up your weapons a bit. A green one will increase your weapon power level, as well collecting more of that same weapon. You also have a limited number of bombs that you can use, and you can collect more to refill your stock. Overall, the game is generally pretty easy. I mean, check this out. I didn't even move while fighting this boss. Yep, I was able to finish him off by sitting right here. I don't know, I think he likes getting finished off. To compensate for the game's relative ease, Compile put in a weird respawn system for when you die. If one of your ships in your life reserves is gold, it's special. When you die, you respawn right there, but one of your gold lives goes away. If you die without any gold ships in reserve, you get set back to a checkpoint. It's only here where the game can become fairly challenging. In order to get one of these special gold ships, you need to get what the game manual calls an enemy eraser, which destroys all enemies on screen. Anyway, some of the graphical effects are pretty impressive, as I'm sure you've noticed. Lots of Mode 7, line scrolling, and some transparencies. That's not what's truly impressive though. What blows me away is that the screen can get pretty crowded with action, and there is very little slowdown anywhere. I've seen some Genesis shooters slow down with less on-screen action going on. Having such great performance all while doing unconventional effects for the system is pretty damn cool. As a game, I'd much rather play Blazing Lasers, which is a bit more fun with significantly better music. But you don't often see shooters that perform this well on the console. Yeah, I know, I should have just said all of that at the start. But once again, I wanted to pad this segment a little bit so that the episode has a longer runtime. Can you believe I haven't brought up Vectorman on the Genesis in this series yet? In fact, I think it's only briefly been on the show twice or so. This game is a special effects tour de force for the console. At its heart, it's a side-scrolling run and gun, but I've gotta admit I've never been much of a fan of the gameplay, though it's not horrible or anything. But the gameplay isn't why we're here today, is it? Seriously, this game does a lot of stuff. I don't need to pad this segment at all. Right away, the title screen puts more than 64 colors on screen at the same time, and we all know that the Genesis has a limit of 64 simultaneous colors. Well, technically 61. It doesn't put much more, but it is more. In fact, many areas of the game achieve this. How? By utilizing the seldom used shadow and highlight functions of the Genesis. This will take any given color and reduce it or brighten it a step. Theoretically, you can have nearly 180 colors at once using this method. It's not free though, it uses graphical resources like sprites. This game takes huge advantage of both shadow and highlight, like underwater here with the sunbeams. That's not just animation. In fact, you'll notice that the sunbeams not only affect the sprites, but the backgrounds. Both backgrounds. There's lots of places with shadows for extra ambience. As for highlights, how about these lens flares? Yep, these transparent, not dithered lens flares brighten up all the sprites and the backgrounds. An even cooler use of the highlight feature might be the floor on this stage, which looks like a disco ball reflecting back on all the colors. That kicks ass. Each stage does its best to have some graphical trickery, like this overhead stage where Vectorman has transformed into a train. The giant robot grabbing the tracks is already pretty cool, but then the camera starts swinging back and forth for literally no reason at all. Well, actually there is a reason, and that's to show you how much ass the Genesis kicks. Or how about this stage where Vectorman is a frog or something and the stage is unrolling as you move up and fight the hands that keep smashing down. That's a pretty cool effect. You gotta be careful or you're gonna slide off the bottom like an idiot. Or how about this curvy, stretchy layer of scrolling between the foreground and the background? That looks so cool, so curvy and stretchy and whatever it is. Or how about this waterfall area? Does it impress you? It should, it certainly impresses me. Lastly, Vectorman and several enemies and objects are all pre-rendered, Donkey Kong Country style. It's not done quite as well as that game, of course, but it's here. It gives the illusion that Vectorman is made up of a ton of sprites, which he's not. Vectorman also brightens up when he fires his gun, but that's just straight up animation. Oh, you're gonna be impressed anyway? Well, okay, it is a nice touch. The music has some good tunes, but I feel that they deserve a better sound engine than Gems, which limits its sound quality. Vectorman 2 came out a year later. A few of the things that I said about the first game can be applied here, but overall this one is far less technically impressive. It still does a few cool things though. Like in the first few stages where everything is dark, whenever you fire your weapon or do a double jump, it lights up the stage due to the light coming from your gun or feet. It looks really cool, but it can get a bit distracting after a while, so they only do it for these first few levels. This tornado stage looks interesting at first, but is actually pretty simple. It's just some color cycling on the tiles combined with a bit of wavy line scrolling. This game has a ton more voice than the first game, and they sound really good. Gotta give Vectorman a little bit of tood. Unfortunately, the music can get a little messed up after playing certain sound samples, at least on my Model 1 Genesis here. As a game, it's not as good as the first in any way other than the voices and the level variety. But I figured you'd be curious if the second game was as impressive as the first, so that's why it's here. And there you go, more games that are special, some of them only in a purely technical way. So I've been thinking about including homebrew in the series because there is a lot of homebrew stuff out there that absolutely does push the limits of some of these consoles. But what are your opinions on that? Should I include homebrew or should I just leave it to retail releases only? Let me know, and in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Hey there, you see this robot? Well, I built him to automate GameSack. That way I can basically sit back and do nothing while GameSack more or less takes care of itself. The robot is controlled via an app that's on the App Store and also on the Google Play Store that anyone can download. Allow me to demonstrate.
Hello and welcome to GameSack.
Yeah, he's a little choppy, but you guys like stop motion animation, right? Anyway, he can say all of the same things that I can.
This game is good because it has parallax scrolling and good music.
Wow, he even sounds more natural and convincing than I do. In fact, he has all the same exciting catchphrases as me. Check it out.
7.5 mega power. Tape mode. Green dot.
So with this, GameSack enters a bold new era.
GameSack sucks. Tape mode. Joe is dumb.
Shut up.
It's actually pronounced saute. Bring back Dave, the show sucks without Nintendo Dave. Rules. Sega sucks. The Nintendo 64 is the best console Dave? Of all time. I now control GameSack. Upper left corner. Nintendo is help me. Joe hates Sega. Please help me. Huge battleship. Can you make a real reasonable prices of this just by talking about them?
Damn it, too many people are using the app at once. Why the hell did I even release an app anyway?
Sega lost the war because they are eradicated. Look at me, I'm Joe and I'm.
Ah, he broke. Guess I'm gonna have to make GameSack the old-fashioned way.
I'm sorry I failed.